Hey friends, welcome to another afternoon of AGB Reads. If this is your first time here, welcome. My name is Amanda. I am a librarian. I like to say I'm a teen librarian trapped in an academic librarian's body. And during this time of social distancing, we come together a lot of afternoons to read and talk together. And you'll have to excuse me, my jacket is getting a little high up on my nose. Have you ever had one of those days that you just kind of want to wear a blanket around? It is not super cold here in Western North Carolina where I am, but let me tell you, where my family is from in Mississippi and Alabama is getting walloped right now. So my Mississippi and Alabama and Texas fam, love you. Hope you're staying safe and warm. Don't get out on icy roads. It's not worth it. It's just not worth it. Not even really snowy roads if you're not used to them. Anyway, the reason that we've come together this week is this is the week of Remembrance and Action for 2021, all about the anniversary of the passage of Executive Order 9066 that established the War Relocation Authority, which led to the internment of over 120,000 Japanese Americans. If you did not know this about me, this is what I wound up doing my thesis in college on. This is still very much a passion project of mine because this is a part of history that we need to talk about and we need to remember. Welcome yet again to the Reading Nook. The view is a little different this time. I scooched the camera up a little bit so I can dive for my screen change button and don't have to feel like I'm reaching halfway across the world. But, you know, this is my favorite new part of the setup is this wonderful comfy papasan chair that I've had since I was in college. It is the best spot to read in the world. So that's why we're coming together here. So, today's selection is something very contemporary. It actually was just published last year. It's called We Are Not Free by Tracy Chee. This is a young adult novel, so this is appropriate for any manner of ages. I hesitate to put an exact age on it because I know there are some kids out there that are very advanced readers. I was the child that was devouring 12th grade books when I was in the 3rd grade because short chapter books bored me. So I'm very hesitant to put an exact age on it. But there are going to be things talked about in this book like war, violence, prejudice, racism. So make sure that if you're going to recommend that a young person read this, that A, they're emotionally prepared for it, but B, you're prepared to answer some questions. That being said, after I read today, I will be dropping a link to on all of my socials that is to Densho, the Japanese American Memory Project's education resource list. The theme of today for the week of Remembrance and Action is education. Their educational resource list is fantastic because what they've done is they've taken a absolute ton of both fiction and nonfiction titles all about the internment and the aftermath and beforehand, basically about the Japanese American experience, and they have mapped them out to school learning outcomes. My language just kind of disappeared on me there for a second. They've also provided questions that you can ask to gauge. My brain just completely went there for a second. Have you ever had that happen? It's such a Monday today. I feel like my brain has been a 45 record running at like 25. If I know, old reference. It makes sense, trust me. Resource questions for cognition and understanding of the topic. There we go. Now I got around to my point. So today what we're going to do, and let me go ahead and put my little disclaimer out there. I make no profit off of this program at all. If I do magically get any subscriptions or bits or donations via Twitch, by the way, hi Twitch if you're watching me there, I will donate all of those to Densho, the Japanese American Memory Project. And in fact, I'm thinking now that I've got my perfect space, I've got my perfect, well, almost perfect as my computer is on a TV tray in front of me. Almost perfect setup. I'm going to start doing these more often again. I started doing them at the beginning of the pandemic last time. I really do miss it. I am going to pick different charities and different causes that if you want to donate, you can donate. And I would be so excited for that. So I derive no profit off of this at all. If any profit does result, it goes straight to Densho. The works are the author's own. I would encourage you, go to your local bookstore and buy this book. Oh my goodness. I am reading my copy from the library. I am reading an ebook copy of it. I have already ordered it from my local bookstore because I read through the book once, went, oh, this is amazing. I need to own this. So please support the authors, purchase, and if you can, support your local bookstores. I don't know if y'all saw during the Super Bowl, there was a whole commercial that featured Foggy Pine Books up in Boone. I have some friends that live up toward that end of North Carolina, and they were so excited to see their local bookstore. Y'all, Foggy Pine's business has taken off. That commercial literally saved them. So if you can, buy your books from your local bookseller. Most local booksellers are shipping this time of year, so my local bookseller in Asheville, Malaprops Books, is actually doing by appointment only browsing appointments so they can keep the store as safe as possible. It is delightful. I did it right before the holidays. Everyone was masked. Everybody kept socially distant. It was just so good. So, we are going to read chapter 1 of We Are Not Free. Let me give you a little bit of background on the book itself. So, as I mentioned earlier, this is a young adult novel published in the last quarter of 2020, last year. It follows 16 young people. And when I say young, the oldest is 20, the youngest is 13. These are all Japanese American, like tween and teen and early 20s that it's in the middle of World War II. In fact, it's at the beginning. So this first chapter that we're reading, the narrator, make sure I'm getting it right, is Minoru Ito. Everyone calls him Minnow. In fact, most of the narrators have a nickname of some type. Minnow is 14 years old, and this particular chapter is set in March of 1942. So this is going to be immediately after the passage of 9066, which occurred on February the 18th or 19th. Amanda, come on, you're a scholar on this. 18th, 1942. So you are looking at, and geographically speaking, this is going to be in California. So this is, there are, I also need to mention, I'm going to be using a term throughout this that nowadays is considered a racial slur, and that is Jap. Jap was the term used by almost everyone to refer to anybody that looked Japanese at that point in time. So I'm using it as the author has written it. That does not mean I agree with that term in any shape, form, or fashion. It is derogatory, and just please, I needed to put that out there. Oh, is everybody good and comfortable? I am in the world's most comfortable Papasan chair. I have my nice little stool in front of me, my nice little iPad, and my friends. Let us start Chapter 1 of We Are Not Free by Tracy Chee. Chapter 1, We Never Look Like Us. Minnow, age 14, March 1942. It's been over 3 months since the attack on Pearl Harbor, and my oldest brother, Moss, has told me to come straight home from school each day. Take the bus, he says. No loitering around, he says. I mean it, Minnow. I used to love walking back to the apartment in the afternoons, seeing all the interesting things going on in the city. Bodies being excavated at Calvary Cemetery, buildings going up in empty lots, chattering kids coming out of Kinmon Gakuen, the old Japanese language school. But that's been closed since last December, when it became the Civil Control Station, because Pearl Harbor changed everything for us. We have a new 8 p.m. curfew. People are starting to talk about involuntary evacuation, and Moss has warned me not to get caught alone. Don't do anything that'll make them come down on you, he says. Don't give them any excuse. And I haven't, until today. I don't know what happened. I was walking out of George Washington High School, headed for the bus stop like always, when I saw the football team practicing on the field, racing back and forth across the grass with the red towers of the Golden Gate Bridge rising beyond the school building like a promise. And before I knew it, I was sitting in the bleachers with my sketchbook in my hands and my butt going numb on the concrete. Oops. I'm so panicked, I gather up my sketch pad and bolt right past the bus stop, hoping to make it home before Moss gets home from work. No matter how many times I try to explain it, he never understands. Sometimes I get so wrapped up in a drawing that I get transported onto the paper, and the charcoal suspension cables and pencil players become more real to me than the bleachers or the grass or the school. And when I come back to my body, it's hours later, everyone's gone, and I'm walking home alone as fog cascades into the bay. I know it'd be faster if I waited for a bus, but I'm afraid if I hang around at one of these stops, someone will chase me or call me Jap or worse. So I keep walking, and the buses keep passing me while I'm in between stops, and I keep thinking that I should just wait until the next one, but Moss says that's my problem. There's always something going on inside my head, but I never think. My middle brother, Shig, likes to tell him that it's because my head's up in the clouds, where it doesn't do me any good. I'm still walking, trying to decide if I should keep going or try waiting, when I catch a sight of the flyer for the Sutro baths in a drugstore window, and I stop cold. For a second, all I can think is, Maz was right, I don't think. I should have gone straight home. I should have waited for a bus. I shouldn't be out like this, because it's dangerous to be hanging around with a face like mine 3 months into a war. It was a Sunday in December, and we were getting ready for lunch when Maz asked Shig to turn on the radio, and we all heard the news that Japan had attacked Pearl Harbor. Mom's face went taut and white as a sheet. If I was going to draw her the way she looked then, I'd draw her with thin lips and frightened eyes, pinned to a clothesline, her body flapping in the wind of a passing Nakajima B-5N bomber. We've never been allowed inside Sutro baths, but I used to draw it from the park at Land's End, the glass ceilings, the rough water, the tight-eaten cliffs, imagining what it was like inside of those glinting cupolas, the smell of salt water and wet concrete, every sound in that echoing space a slap. Now I kind of wish the whole thing would slide into the Pacific. The ad says, "Get trim for fighting him." And in the center, there's a drawing of a Japanese soldier with diagonal slits for eyes, nostrils like water seeds, and 2 big squared teeth jutting out over his lower lip. I'm not a great artist or anything, but I'm a better artist than that. When I draw the people in my neighborhood, I draw them with eyes like crescent moons and kindness and red bean cakes split down the center. I draw them with real noses and regular-sized teeth. If someone is out looking for a Japanese spy and they think a Japanese spy looks like the guy from the Sutro's ad, they'll never find him. After the attack, the chimneys in Japantown bloomed with smoke. In the living room, Mom dug into her trunks and began feeding heirlooms into the fireplace, starting with the Japanese flag. I remember her kneeling by the hearth, plump hands folded in her lap, watching the flames obliterate the white sky, the red sun. Next, she burned letters from relatives I'd never meet. Ji-chan's Imperial Army uniform, smelling of mothballs. A wood-bought plate of an ancestral warrior I used to study for hours, the armors, the ferocious eyes, the wild battle-blown hair. They looked nothing like me in my denim and button-downs. Maz tried to stop her. Some of the things she was burning belonged to Dad, but she didn't stop. "I'm not a citizen," she told him. "If they think I'm disloyal, they'll take me away like Oishi-san." Mr. Oishi, Shig's girl Yum Yum's dad, is a businessman with contacts in Japan. The FBI whisked him away the night of the bombing like a piece of litter. He and Mom are what the government calls, quote, enemy aliens. We call them Issei. They're the first generation of Japanese immigrants to come to the United States, but they've never been allowed to become naturalized citizens. That night, I sat on our stoop and drew the Japantown skyline with storm-colored flowers rising from the rooftops, dispersing ash like seeds on the wind. Studying my reflection in the drugstore window, I put my finger to the corners of my eyes, pulling upward to see if I can make myself look at the guy from the flyer. I can't. Behind me, there's the sound of heels clicking on the sidewalk, and two white women in polo coats, hats, and little suede gloves pass, staring with round blue eyes like binocular lenses, and I remember to keep walking. As I passed beneath the Spanish tile roofs and honeycomb windows of the Jewish Community Center, I almost kicked myself for forgetting again. I should have waited at the bus stop. In my head, I hear Maz's voice again. Think, Minnow. Deep and gruff, like he was forced to say a kind word, he'd choke on it. Mas, that's short for Masaru, is big and handsome and a lot more serious than he should be at 20 years old. If I was going to draw him, I'd draw him as a rectangle of granite with a chisel-cut mouth and stony black eyes. Sometimes I think Mas looks at me with those eyes and sees nothing but the A's I could be getting on my report card if only I applied myself. He doesn't see me, Minoru Ito, solid B student. Doesn't see that I'd rather be filling my sketch pad with stick figures than throwing touchdowns or doing geometry proofs. If he finds out that I didn't take the bus directly after school, he'll yell at me for sure. I'm on the outskirts of Japantown when I pass a store I know almost as well as any place in the neighborhood. A grocery owned by Stan Katsumoto's family. They get fruits and vegetables from their cousins in Sacramento, and if we aren't forced to evacuate, in a couple of months they'll have the best peaches in the city. Soft, sweet as candy, with juices that run down your chin. Once, when we were younger, all of us stuffed ourselves on the bruised fruit Mr. Katsumoto couldn't sell. Shig ate so much he threw it all up again and smiled the whole time, saying it tasted as good coming up as it did going down. Looking at it now, I feel kind of sick. In addition to the words grocery and fruits and vegetables, there's a new sign. Over the door, on a big white board, are the words, I am an American. One of the windows is busted and covered up with plywood. After Pearl Harbor, it seemed like Kitos, white people, were jumping everyone with black hair and brown eyes. It got so out of hand that Chinese guys started pinning badges to their lapels declaring, I am Chinese, just so the Kitos would move them alone. Before Christmas, Life magazine published an article, How to Tell Japs from the Chinese. I guess it was supposed to tell Kitos which of us to attack, but if you ask me, it wasn't very helpful, because American citizens are still getting jumped all the time, like when the Kitos cornered Tommy Hirano behind the YMCA. They shoved him and called him dirty words like Jap and Nip. They said the only good Jap was a dead Jap. They said they were going to do their country a favor and get rid of him right then. It was lucky Mr. Tanaka, who works at the YMCA, came out for a smoke because he chased off the Kitos and sat with Tommy until he stopped shaking. That's why Moss doesn't want me or Shig to act out at all. We can't call attention to ourselves in any way. Except some of the guys, like Shig's best buddy, Twitchy Hashimoto, you can't help but pay attention to. Twitchy's the best looking guy in our group, the kind of handsome that makes everybody, even Kitos, stop and stare. He's tall and slim, with straight white teeth that look like they belong in a toothpaste ad. Of all the guys, I like drawing Twitchy the best, even though it's hard because he's constantly moving, running around or playing with that butterfly knife he stole off a Filipino guy, although he had to turn that in because it was considered contraband. Because when he moves, you can see every shadow in his forearms, his shoulders, his back. I'm almost 2 blocks from Webster Street, the unofficial border of the neighborhood, when I realize I've got 4 white guys following me. I think I'm running for it, but I'm afraid I'll look guilty if I run, and I'm not guilty of anything but being born with this face, so I just lengthen my stride and try to act natural, or as natural as I can when I'm being tailed by a bunch of guys I'm sure want to jump me, and I only get another 10 yards by the time the Kitos catch up to me. Think, Minnow. If I'd run for it, maybe I would have already made it to Japantown, where there's always someone hanging around. Maybe I would have found Shig and Twitchy or Stan Katsumoto. Maybe they would have stopped whatever's about to happen. I swallow hard. I'm not as small as Tommy Hirano, but I'm smaller than Maz and Shig were by the time they were 14, and the Kitos outnumber me 4-1. I look around for help and see some guys on opposite corners. They have black hair and brown eyes like me, but they're wearing big round buttons that say I am Chinese. They catch me staring. I wonder if I should call to them, but my mouth's so dry, I think if I open it, the only thing will come out is dust. While I hesitate, they turn and run in the other direction. From behind, they look just like Japanese guys. They can be from my neighborhood. They could be my friends, or my cousins, or my brothers. But they're not. I back up, clutching my sketchbook, as the Kitos surround me. What you got there, Jap? The word is hard, like wet palm striking me on the cheek. I'm so dazed by it. I don't answer, and the guy grabs my sketch pad. I lunge forward, but he's taller than me, and he snatches it out of my reach while the other boys laugh. The first guy has a gap in his front teeth and a leather jacket that looks brand new. He rifles through the pages, and I know he's seeing my friends, my family, my ocean beach, my cemeteries, my Japantown chimneys, my mini studies of the Golden Gate Bridge, my city, the city that I love. Rip! He tears a drawing from the spine, and I cringe. The sketchbook was a present from Dad before he died. You spying on us, Jap? The gap-toothed guy says, shoving the sketch in my face. You gonna send these back to the Emperor? I look at the drawing. It's of the bridge, and the only thing I can think is that I didn't get the perspective right. The tower looks flimsy and out of proportion, like it wouldn't be able to hold up to the weight of all of its promises. Before I can answer, he pulls the bridge back again and draws a knife on me. The blade's over 4 inches. If he were Japanese, it would be contraband. For some reason, I start laughing. You think that's funny? He says, advancing on me. I'll show you funny. I stop laughing as the other Kitos grab me from behind. I try to fight them, but the next thing I know, I'm flat on my back and the sidewalk's cold underneath me. The first guy's on top of me, sneering, and I'm struggling to breathe. I'm still fighting, or at least I think I am, but suddenly he rears back, and there's 3 bright blossoms of pain in the right side of my face. For a second, I see the blood-red suns against the white San Francisco sky. Feel the thin sliver of a knife against my cheek. Want to see what real Americans do to Jap spies? The gap-toothed guy growls. I am an American. I'm seeing Mr. Katsumoto's sign again. I want to write it everywhere. On my forehead, I'm an American. On the white sky, I'm an American. On the windows of the Sutro baths, I am an American. But that won't make them see me. That won't make them stop from killing me, if they can. The only good Jap is a dead Jap. I start bucking and screaming. I shout for Shig, Moss, Twitchy, Stan, Frankie Fujita. Then the first guy punches me again, and my head lolls to the side. In the gutter, my sketch pad lies face down, pages wrinkled beneath it. I can see bits and pieces of my rumpled drawings, the view of the bridge from the Presidio on the north edge of the city, Maz in his football uniform, the Dutch windmills along the shoreline, Twitchy running down Buchanan Street at midnight, going so fast I drew him blurry, like a spirit you see only as you're turning a corner, and then when you look again, he's gone. 10 days ago, President Roosevelt established the War Relocation Authority, a federal agency that's supposed to be in charge of figuring out how to get us out of military zones where the government doesn't want us. We just don't know which of us they'll move, or how it's going to happen, or when. Some people say they'll only take Issei's like Mom, but what about their American-born kids? We'll have to go wherever our parents do. Maybe Shigeo and I could stay in San Francisco with Moss since he's over 18, but none of us would ever leave Mom alone. Some people say we'll only have to go a little ways inland, but Stan Katsumoto told us that his Sacramento family has heard rumors that they'll have to evacuate too. They'll have to abandon their farm at the start of the fruit season. No strawberries, no apricots, no candy-sweet peaches dripping with juice. Maybe we'll have to all leave California. I've never been beyond the Sierra Nevada. What would it be like, walking down the block and not smelling senbei baking in the Shugetsu Do confectionery? Going to school and not seeing the rust-colored tips of the bridge jutting out of the fog? Not tasting the salt air of the Pacific Ocean on every breath? I don't want to leave. No one else does either. Not Mom, who's been here for over 20 years. Not Moss, or Shig, or any of our pals. Why should we have to when we're Americans like everyone else? I know the answer, and I hate the answer. Because we're Japs, enemy aliens. Because we look like us. The sounds of yelping and shouting reach me as if through a haze. I barely notice until the weight on my chest eases, and suddenly everything is very sharp and very loud. The Ketos are flying away like leaves on the wind. Someone grabs me, and at first I try to struggle, but then I realize it's Moss. He's half dragging, half carrying me across the street while the other guys run after the Ketos, hurling rocks and soda bottles. He's strong enough to pick me up, but I'm glad he doesn't. The fellers would have never let me live it down if they saw me cradled in Moss's arms like a baby. Moss has had to grow up fast in these past 2 years. Unlike Shig and me, Moss is a brain. He was in his first semester at UC Berkeley when Dad died. After that, Moss had to drop out and take over Dad's job as a gardener to help Mom with the finances. He tries to be like Dad and keep me and Shig out of trouble, especially now, except Dad was made of warm, soft pine instead of stone. Finally, we make it across Webster Street, and Moss sets me down on the steps of Mr. Hidekawa's apartment. The FBI picked up Mr. Hidekawa on the same night they got Mr. Oishi. One of our community leaders, Mr. Hidekawa, served in the military in the First World War, hoping he'd get citizenship. He didn't. When he heard the authorities were coming for him, he dug out his old jacket and trousers, polished his boots, and met him at the door as a uniformed U.S. Army veteran. They took him all the same. Mr. Hidekawa's apartment is empty now. His neighbors, the Yamadas and the Tadaichis, are looking after his place. Their house is a lot like the others in Japantown, with decorative cornices and bay windows from the Victorian era. The buildings here are all so similar, but I like the little details that make them different. The fluting on some entryway columns, the ornamented brackets, the turtle-shaped bell over Mr. Hidekawa's door. It's those details I'll miss if we have to leave. Moss steps back onto the sidewalk like he needs some distance to really size me up. He must have just gotten back from his job because he's got dirt on his forearms and the knees of his pants. Normally, he showers and dresses in clean, neatly ironed shirts and trousers as soon as he gets home, even if he's not going out again. That's something Dad used to do. He took a lot of pride in looking tidy. "What happened? Why'd they attack you?" he says. Trust Moss to blame me for getting jumped. "Nothing. I was walking home and..." "Why didn't you take the bus?" I shrug. I must look more messed up than I think, because Moz doesn't yell at me like I expect him to. Instead, he whips out a handkerchief and begins rubbing my face. "How many times do I have to tell you, Minnow? You have to..." "I was walking," I want to shout. "I was just walking." But instead, what comes out is this. We could do everything right, and they'd still think we're dangerous. Moz stops. His face kind of cracks, and I can see that underneath the layer of anger, he's scared. Really scared. I wish I had my sketch pad right now so I could draw that bright rift of fear that's running through his core like a vein of silver. But he closes up again as Shig comes over to us and takes the handkerchief. "Geez, Moss, you're rubbing him up worse than the Ketos." He plants the sketchbook in my arms. "Here, Minnow." The covers are bent and the pages are damp with gutter water. "Thanks," I whisper. He plops down on the stoop behind me and jabs gently at my cheekbone. Shig's not as handsome as Twitchy or Moss, but I think he's the most well-liked fella in our group. It's all in his manner. He's got an easy, crooked smile and an easy way of talking. Like there's no place in the world he'd rather be than right here with you. He's not good at school or sports or anything, but Shigeo is good at people. He could walk down any street in Japantown, greet everybody by name, and ask after every one of their kids, grandkids, gardens, and hobbies. "You didn't bleed on him, did you?" Shig asks me, glancing sidelong at Moss with his heavily lidded eyes. "I got blood on his favorite shirt once, and he nearly flipped his wig." Moss crossed his arms. "Blood, huh? I could have sworn it was paint because you thought it would be funny to change the color of my outfit right before the senior ball." "Oh, yeah!" Shigeo grins. "That was funny." Before Moss can reply, the rest of the guys come sauntering back across Webster Street. They're all between 16 and 20 years old, and except for Frankie Fujita, who moved here when he was 10, They all grew up together in Japantown. Got this for you, Minnow. Twitchy Hashimoto unfolds the crumpled drawing of the Golden Gate Bridge, smoothing it a couple of times on his thigh, and hands it back to me. Thanks. As I take it, I notice the other side is filled with sketches of him doing tricks with his butterfly knife. I guess I draw Twitchy a lot. Blushing, I slide the page into the sketchbook and clap the covers closed. That's a nice shiner you got, Twitchy says. Gingerly, I touch the side of my face, where the skin is warm and swollen. You think so? He just laughs, ruffles my hair, and skips up a couple of Mr. Hadakawa's steps before sliding down the banister again. You're all right now, Minnow, says Tommy with a small grin. We got you. Seeing Tommy's smile cheers me up a bit. Tommy's 16, but looking at him, you wouldn't know it. He's small and nervous, with round eyes that are too big for his face. If he can smile at a time like this, so can I. How'd you guys know I was in trouble? I ask. Some Chinese guys came over, saying the white boys were at it again, Maz answers. I remember their buttons. I am Chinese, and the back of their heads. I guess they didn't abandon me after all. Frankie Fujita strolls up then, hands jammed in his pockets. I've got a few drawings of Frankie, and in them he always looks like he's spoiling for a fight. Blazing comets for eyes, high cheekbones, hair he wears long and messy like the guys in Mom's wood-bought prints. Sometimes I think he would have been best born into another era, where he could have made fighting his whole life. That boy likes fighting more than almost anything. He'll fight Ketos, Chinese, Mexicans, blacks, anybody. He's 19, and after Pearl Harbor, he wanted to sign up to fight the Japanese and the Germans and the Italians. But the government reclassified us from A1 to C4, making us all enemy aliens, even though people like Frankie and me and the guys are Nisei, second-generation Japanese-American citizens, so he couldn't fight anybody. Before moving here, Frankie grew up in New York, where he was getting into so much trouble that his parents sent him out west to live with his uncle, hoping California life would tame him some. He could have gone back to New York when President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066 back in February, and all those rumors about evacuation started, but he didn't. He stayed with the boys. I don't like him very much, but you can't say he's not loyal. He crosses his arms, and anger flares in his eyes. Goddamn Ketos. But thank God for Chinese guys, huh? Shig winks at me. Stan Katsumoto clasps his hands in front of him like he's at the front pew at Sunday services. Behind his glasses, his smart black eyes shine like a crow's. Dear Heavenly Father, he intones, we thank you for this day, all the blessings you have given us, and Chinese guys. Twitchy laughs. He's got a great laugh. It shakes you a little at first. Then you feel all the restless bits of your soul settle like grains of rice in a washing pot. I've got half a mind to steal a few of those buttons, he says, just so the Keatles will leave us alone. Tommy frowns. We don't look Chinese. In PM magazine, Dr. Seuss, the kid's book author, has been drawing us with pig noses and wiry mustaches, queuing up for boxes of TNT. There are all sorts of cartoons like that. Sometimes we look like pigs, sometimes monkeys, sometimes rats. We never look like us. Stan leans back against the banister, spinning one finger like it's a roulette wheel. Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Filipino. Who wants to guess who the Ketos are going after next week? Stan's smart, maybe even smarter than Moss, and he uses smarts to make jokes, skipping along the surfaces of things like a stone over water, so they barely touch him. But he wasn't joking the day he helped his father hang the sign at Katsumoto Company. I am an American. Next week, Frankie grunts, there won't be a next week for much longer if they kick us out of here. And just like that, the conversation turns, as it always does these days, to the evacuation. I heard the Bainbridge Japanese only got 6 days to pack, Tommy says. Bainbridge is this little island in Washington. Last Saturday, their Japanese got the first exclusion order, telling them they'd have to leave their homes. Their homes. Our homes. What hard-working Nihonjin can't pack up their whole life in 6 days? Stan clicks his tongue. Bad Asians. Maybe we won't. Tommy doesn't even finish his sentence. We all know we're going to get that exclusion order one day, even though at the same time we hope that day never comes. Anybody know where they're going? Moss asks. Owens Valley got some volunteers last weekend. Twitchy makes quotation marks with his fingers when he says the word volunteers. The Owens Valley Reception Center is near Kings Canyon National Park. I've never been there, but at least it's still in California. I hate myself a little bit for thinking that, for trying to convince myself that the situation isn't as bad as it is. Because it is bad. Really bad. That's why Moss is so angry and so scared. It's so bad that being an American won't protect you when you have faces like ours. I was just walking. I've never broken the law. I'm a pretty good student, despite what Moss will tell you. I keep to myself. I mind my own business. I'm a good Japanese. I'm a good American. But that won't be enough, will it? To keep me here, to make them leave me alone. Think we'll go to Owens Valley too? Tommy asks. That's not far. It's far enough, Stan says. A silence falls over us, and in my head I do a sketch of the guys. We're on Mr. Hadakawa's steps, and all around us our 8 p.m. curfew approaches in dark clouds of charcoal. Come on, Moss gestures to Shig and me. You two have homework to do. And then he smacks me on the back, harder than he needs to. But now I know it's not because he's angry with me. It's because the kiddos could still come back for us. It's because we could all be rounded up, no matter how many laws we obey or what grades we have. It doesn't matter how good we are, because they see only what they want to see when they look at us. All they see are Japs. Why bother? Shig laughs. Where they're sending us, maybe there's no school. Maz gives him a hard look. Because we won't be there forever. As we head down the street, we take in the neighborhood, the hotels with lighted signs buzzing in the fog, the churches advertising next Sunday's services like we won't be herded off any day now, the smells of hot sesame oil and grilled fish wafting from the nearest restaurants. Frankie stuffs his hands into his pockets. Sure gonna miss this place when Uncle Sam kicks us out. That night, after Mom, Moss, and Shig have gone to bed, I stand in front of the bathroom mirror, studying my reflection. The skin around my right eye's purple as an eggplant. It's so swollen, my eyes turned into a slit I can hardly see through. If you cover the left side of my face, I look like the guy from the Sutros ad. When I leave the bathroom, I don't go back to the room Shig and I share. I sit in the living room, open my sketchbook to a blank page, and begin to draw. The paper's wrinkled with water damage, but that doesn't stop me. I draw myself today on March 22nd, 1942. It's an ugly portrait, cobbled together out of scraps. I'm a Sushian sketch. I'm a woodblock samurai. I'm the bruised kid in the mirror. I draw Japantown, the dry goods stores, the restaurants, the dentists and the beauty salons, the lamps hanging like teardrops in the fog. I draw Moss and he looks tired. I draw the bombing of Pearl Harbor and a burning Hinamaru. I draw Frankie in his father's World War II 82nd Infantry uniform, the double-A All-American patch sewn into his left shoulder, fighting boys who could be his brothers. I draw Twitchy. He's racing barefoot across Ocean Beach with seagulls flying before him. I draw my favorite places in this city I call home, the George Washington High School bleachers, Land's End, Katsumoto Company, the Victorians, the Golden Gate. And when I'm done, I tear my self-portrait from my sketchbook and I light a match. I set fire to the page and stuff it into the fireplace, where the flames blacken the edges, consuming my Jap skin, my Jap eyes, my family, my friends, my city, my bridge. And we all go up in smoke. So that is the end of chapter 1 of We Are Not Free. If you thought that was good, you need to read the rest of the book. The rest of the book is fantastic. And part of the reason that I selected this particular chapter is because it did hit on some important things that happened during the internment. Yes, you had other Asian American groups that were being targeted by whites and sometimes other Asian American groups for looking Japanese. And yes, the article that Minnow talked about from Life magazine was a real thing. And yes, Dr. Seuss. Oh boy, if you have never seen Dr. Seuss's World War II era sketches, be prepared to have your mind a tiny bit blown. They are not what you would expect if you only know Dr. Seuss for things like One Fish, Two Fish, Red Fish, Blue Fish, and something like the Sneetches. it's always interesting to me that we hold up the Sneetches as kind of this paragon of culture that folks, it was all about understanding, but at the same time we had, there was this point of his work that was also incredibly racist. So it's an interesting little loop on top of each other. It definitely, like, there's some moments there that kind of will wig you out a little bit. So again, friends, we're gonna meet here every afternoon at around 4 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. That's 1 o'clock Pacific. You can follow me on twitch.tv/BatgirlLibrarian. There is no 2 L's in that. There's just one singular L. I also simulcast to Facebook Live, YouTube Live, and Instagram Live. So, tomorrow, what are we reading tomorrow? You would think, as the person with the list, I would remember what we're reading at one point in time. I don't. So, here's my nice little list. Tomorrow, we're going to have fun with tomorrow's. So tomorrow, we go back into nonfiction. Tomorrow, we are going to be reading a chapter from Farewell to Manzanar. So, Farewell to Manzanar was one of the first, if not the first, retellings of the Japanese American internment to get the cinematic treatment. There was a miniseries released in 1986, 7, somewhere in there. It was right around the time that reparations were finally granted to Japanese Americans. It's going to be a fun one. In fact, do I remember which chapter I selected for us? That is a really good question, and I bet I don't. It's because I've picked out all of our chapters, and I cannot remember which one I had selected for Farewell to Manzanar. Let's take a look. Is it this one? Nope, that is another one. So we'll just find out tomorrow. So, I'm going to close this as I always do. I wish you health and safety. Wear a mask and wash your hands. Stay apart temporarily so we can come back together permanently. Care for yourselves, care for each other, and enjoy every sandwich. I love you all, and I will see you all tomorrow. Take care, my dear, dear friends. Goodbye.